Hi guys, we're here to talk about securing agentic frontiers. I'm John Sautopoulos. I am co-lead of the Agentic Security Initiative and one of the board members of the Gen Security project. And I'm here with Chris and Ron. Why don't I let them introduce themselves? Chris?
Yeah, Chris Hughes here, CEO and co-founder of Aquia, also the host of Resilient Cyber on Substack and podcast outlets and all that. Longtime cybersecurity practitioner, passionate about all things vulnerability management, software supply chain, and AppSec. So excited to chat with you. And I'll pass it over to Ron.
Thanks, Chris. Ron Del Rosario here. I'm co-lead for the OWASP Agentic Security Initiative. I co-lead it with John, and I'm currently a VP and head of AI security for SAP. I take care of the intelligence spend and business network product line. This includes SAP Ariba, SAP Fieldglass, and SAP Business Networks, just to name a few. Thanks, John.
That That's a great addition there, Aaron, that it shows the diversity of skills we bring with OWASP. And I've forgotten to say that I run AI security at Canis and doing very much similar things you do in the UK. But I want us to start. Everyone is asking me, you have your generative AI security project. Why did you want to have an agentic security initiative? Why can you not cover it as part of your top 10 for LLMs? What's so different? What is it we see in agentic security that we couldn't see before? I'll start with you, Ron, because you're my kind of co-lead in the initiative.
Absolutely, absolutely, John. This is an amazing question. I always get this all the time, every time I meet new folks, every time I introduce the Agentic Security Initiative. My thought process around this is we're no longer just dealing with conversational chatbots that simply outputs text, video, or an image, multimodal, every time you ask them, or every time you ask them for a specific question or provide a specific answer, right? So we're no longer limited to static chatbots. We are now using chatbots powered by LLM, by language models. It can be a small language model, it can be a large language model that can actually access tools in response to your question or your query, right? So we're giving access to language models agents to be able to access our internal tools or external data to be able to answer a specific question or respond to a specific query, and that comes with agency, right? So we're giving the capabilities for these language model agents to decide at a specific level how to be able to answer that question, and with agency comes risk.
Very well said there, Ron. And Chris?
Yeah, I love his closing line with agency comes risk. I think about it in the same sense of, autonomy, right? Autonomy brings risk, it brings opportunity. It's kind of a double-edged sword. And, you could make the argument of tucking this into the Gen AI, top 10 and things like that. But this is just too broad and diverse and dynamic of a category, in my opinion, to just be tucked underneath Gen AI. As he talked about there, we're going to have agents. They're all going to have their associated credentials and identities. They're going to have external and internal tool use and tool chain activities. It's just opening a whole Pandora's box of potential risks and things that we need to consider from a security perspective. And I think it warrants its own focus area. We've seen already several kind of researchers highlighting various attacks that can be carried out. Problems with the protocols that are going to support agentic AI. It's a new category in its own right, in my opinion.
I agree with you, both of you, and I think it's a watershed moment. And I think I like what you said there, Chris, about seeing new vulnerabilities and exploits. Actually, compared to all the other conversations of the top 10, we're seeing real-world exploits. We're seeing Microsoft Echo League, we're seeing technology that's being developed, embedded in operating systems and in the most popular productivity suite like Office. So it kind of covers an awful lot of that. And I have some thoughts in my head, but what would be the key risks that you see? We talked about agency. We talked about agency comes with risk. Chris, what is the kind of scenarios that worry you? So what are some kind of threats and vulnerabilities that you see very high there for people to worry about?
Yeah, I'm actually going to lean on some of the content from the kickoff call that we had around Agentic AI Top 10. In there you have things like identity and privilege abuse. And as I talked about, all these agents are going to have their own credentials or multiple sets of credentials and identities, for example, depending on the context of how they're being used. If you look at, historical trends like credential compromise, it's always a leading attack vector. And we've struggled historically with that with human users. Now you're throwing agents which are 10, 20, 30, some estimates are 50 times as many human users in the environment as we move forward forward, that's going to be a problem in terms of securing those credentials, securing the agents, preventing them from being used maliciously, moving laterally, leading to data exfiltration, like you name it, all these kind of activities and attacks. There's also the ability to have cascading failures, right? If you have an impact of one agent that has interactive access with external tools or data or systems, what's that going to lead to from a cascading failure aspect? There's a whole supply chain security aspect to this that's going to come into play. So these things are all top of mind, and we've seen, people starting to present research, as you talked about already, of, what are some things that you can do to kind of use these agents maliciously or for, purposes that are not really intended, right? And how can they contribute to broader attack chains? And I think that's where it's going to get really interesting. And it's really, bringing to the question of how are we going to govern these AI agents? There's going to be exponentially more of them than us, right? And how are we going to have an inventory of the agents that we have in our environment, understand their access that they have, their credentials, understanding what tools and data they have access to, how are they using it, observing that activity in real time at scale is going to be problematic. So there's going to be a lot of things to cover in this conversation, honestly.
Yes, and multi-agency definitely adds to that. So when I go back to people asking why not in top 10, well, actually, in addition to autonomy and the agency, the scale is just phenomenal. But we'll come back to that in a minute. Ron, what are the top items that keep you thinking about agentic security?
I think this is my response is a good segue to Chris's, which is from a governance perspective, right? I think the biggest threat right now is for security leaders globally is the lack of visibility, understanding, and traceability regarding this AI systems or agents, right? I think from a security and compliance leadership perspective, it's very important for us to have visibility across all the AI or agent projects inside our organization. That's number one. We need to understand. We need to understand which product group is using them and for which specific purpose, right? And which data they have access to. That's the understanding piece, visibility, understanding. And very important is the traceability aspect. So as security leaders and compliance leaders as well, we need to understand how this AI system or agentic application was able to come up with this decision for a specific problem or issue. We need to have that X-ray visibility regarding the steps this agentic system took to be able to come up with that decision, so we can either troubleshoot or we can correct, and we can inject humans in the loop for proper governance. I think visibility, understanding, and traceability is very important.
I think they're critical, and I think I'm glad you said that, Ron, because if you think about human in the loop, you mentioned human in the loop, that works very nicely if you have one chatbot. When you start having dozens of agents, how on earth is that going to scale? And I think the latest, and I heard Steve Wilson at Project Share talking about that human on the loop is becoming a new way of thinking, which is, well, yes, we acknowledge the autonomy of the agent, but we have those signals, we have those guardrails that we escalate risky
Absolutely.
decisions to the human. And I think, you're right, unless we have that observability, that tracing, that understanding, it's not going to really scale very well. Chris, any thoughts on scaling AI and human in the loop?
Yeah, it's a critical problem, as you guys are pointing out. It's just a challenge of scale, and we're seeing people propose swarms of agents, right, to go and conduct activities. And as I talked about from an identity perspective, it's already going to be problematic just monitoring what they're doing in these environments, what they're accessing, how they're using data, if they're behaving anomalously or not. All these things are going to be challenging given the scale. I do want to kind of balance it out and say there's also a lot of opportunity here. When you look at, and I did this during our RSA talk when we talked a while back, was there's also a lot of opportunity here, whether you look at AppSec and runaway vulnerability backlogs that we simply can't keep up with, or iterative, development cycles that are just too fast for humans to, kind of always be involved in per se. GRC, when you look at the problems around, legacy compliance processes, paperwork, documentation, static documentation, et cetera. And then SecOps, alert fatigue, investigation, triage. Like there are a lot of opportunities here, but also a lot of risks. So it's a double-edged sword for sure.
But I like your positive spin there, Chris, and I completely agree with you. We're fighting an asymmetrical game with skill shortages that we're not going to solve anytime soon. I can't remember who published that report on CISO fatigue, on things coming. People, when I talk to CISOs here, they say, well, I'm drowning and you're just showing me the water. It's kind of, I have a new bill, cyber resilience bill. So I think agentic AI shouldn't just be a problem that we need to secure, but also by doing that, we enable those security agents, those autonomous security agents, to help teams in cyber AI scale. And I think that's a kind of a fundamental problem we want to solve. But I want to go a little bit to more kind of established problems, if you like. So when you get Copilot, when you get Agentic AI, one of the first things people worry about is data access and data permissions. And then you have Ecolig, where they had all the access permissions sorted, but it was evaluated using the victim's access rules. Is there anything, do we need to rethink zero trust? Do we need to take into account, how do we solve access permission in an agentic era?
I'm curious to hear Ron's perspective. I'll just say on the zero trust topic, it's interesting. I'll just say this, like this past week alone, looking at the supporting infrastructure and protocols around agentic AI, like MCP, model context protocol is a big one, right? In the last week alone, they discovered the first openly published malicious MCP server that's just sitting out there waiting for people to connect to it. And then they've also discovered, another researcher discovered that it's an actual functional and publicly used MCP server that was out there. They kept it running and it was good for a couple of months. People were using it, hundreds of downloads, and then they injected some malicious backdoors into it. And it's kind of the age-old problem with open source. People are just going out there and using things on the internet. So the reason I bring that up is in the age of zero trust, never trust, always verify when it comes to agentic AI, MCP, et cetera, open source. People are using a lot of implicit trust, and it's going to lead to a lot of problems.
I think the same thing. Yeah, that's a good thing, Chris. I think the same thing, the same concept applies with these agentic systems integrated with your developer IDEs or development environment, right? I think one solid example is I'm going to reuse my concept of visibility, understanding, and traceability. We're going to zero in on understanding. I think one gap that we have right now within security teams and development teams, they lack the understanding of the capabilities of these agentic systems integrated in their IDEs. So fundamentally, if you look at all this agentic integration with IDEs, let's use a GitHub Copilot as an example, as one of the most famous. There's two levels of integration for agentic. One is what they call the ask mode, where as a developer, you have your prompt for your GitHub Copilot, and if you click ask mode, you're simply just asking this agent about your code base or what it has access to, right? So it doesn't have local access to your file system, to your code, and it cannot execute any command on your terminal. Versus the agent mode, and the agent mode, this is the more serious one, because when you're using an agent mode in a typical agentic integration with IDE, you're giving that agent native access not only to your code base, but also to your file storage and basically the entire directory of your computer, of your operating system where the code is running. So I think at an understanding level, I think this is not exposed enough. Like, look, you're giving a language model which has non-deterministic characteristic access to your code base. I know it has been trained properly by big companies out there to do secure code, but as a developer, as a security engineer, you need to understand the risk involved versus just clicking on yes, 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 or agreeing on the agent to execute this code. I think we still, that human on the loop concept that you just mentioned, John, I think 100% it applies when it comes to security issues originating from agentic integration with IDEs.
If I could just, Bill, I just want to tag on to what Ron said there. A few things that I found interesting is, like, I'm always watching the research and publications that are coming out around this stuff. And, we're starting to see a bit of a cognitive dependency on the agents and the LLMs, where people are just inherently trusting what they say. Like they're just kind of clicking through, as he said. They don't even necessarily take the time to rigorously review and validate what's being done. And then also there was another interesting research out there that it showed that even when the LLM or copilots or coding agents produce secure code in its first iteration, developers tend to iterate on that, right? And it showed that with more iterations, it actually got more and more insecure rather than more secure. So it's a very problematic paradigm we have, where we're over relying on these things and inherently trusting them, and just not validating the outputs. And it's like, what's the attack surface going to look like in the future? Not only of the agents themselves as part of the attack surface, but what they produce as well.
Absolutely, I agree.
And I think I think there is a fundamental problem in that. I was reading about an AWS IBM research where 85% of or 82% of CX level executives said AI security, of course. I think everyone should have it. It's the best thing. And then down the line, there is another question. How would you prioritize innovation versus security? And 56% said innovation, of course. And so, we're under pressure as capabilities increase. And you talked about developers that the dependency increase. I really like that because it becomes part of normal life now. And you don't want to be seen lagging behind the world. But as you both said, there are common sense things we can do. I don't think you need to be an expert on zero trust not to allow an agent to have access to your production system. What you said there earlier on, Ron, would be very good advice for the CEO who apologized, and I'm not going to name the startup, who lets the agent deletes the entire, I can't remember, code base or database of production
delete the
system.
entire database. Yeah.
So I think, I think we need to strike that balance between, it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be that kind of deep threat modeling to understand the things. Some of the hygiene that we've learned, the common sense, learn. And this is what I think I've heard from both of you. Learn before you start expanding is the best advice that we can give to people. And that's my advice. What would be your advice if we kind of said, what would you tell people to do as they adopt agentic AI? Ron,
I'll jump in, Ron. Yeah, go ahead, Ron. I tend to talk too much. Go ahead.
No, go ahead,
No,
Chris.
sorry,
You go start. I think we have a good segue, so I'll let you start.
Yes.
Yeah, from my perspective, is like, there's always a quote in cybersecurity, like you can't secure what you don't understand, right? Is a phrase you'll hear a lot. And there's also a book called Crossing the Chasm. And it talks about like organizations being early adopters, late adopters, laggards, things like that. In our nature in cybersecurity, we're very risk averse. We tend to be a late adopter because we're always thinking, what can go wrong? Like, what if this doesn't work out? What if it gets exploited? And these are all valid questions that we need to be thinking about. But we also need to be thinking about what can go right. And what happens if I don't build competencies and proficiencies with this technology? We know damn well the business, the development teams, the attackers, they're all going to be forward-leaning. They're all going to be early adopters of this technology. And if we want to keep up and help the business actually adopt it securely or keep up with attackers, as you talked about from the asymmetric aspect of being outnumbered and workforce challenges, things like that, we need to build proficiencies with the technology. We need to understand how it works. How can we use it? How can we secure it? How can we leverage it for our goals, much like the business is doing, much like developers are doing, and much like attackers are doing? So my recommendation is really to kind of dive in head first and really get familiar with it. That way you understand how to secure it.
100%, Chris. And I think from my take on this is two levels. Is one from a business leader or business organization perspective is, number one is know what data the agentic system has access to, and number two, understand its capabilities or what it can execute. Because data and autonomy is what makes agentic systems powerful if we don't have solid understanding and visibility of its capabilities. And from a security engineering leader perspective, I think you need to, going back to your point, Chris, I think we need to have a solid understanding of a basic threat model, right? I think threat model is very important in the for agentic systems. This is why one of the very first projects that our research document that we released under Agentic Security Initiative is a threat model based agentic threats and mitigations, right? Because we need to have that as security engineering leaders, we need to have that mental model from a threat modeling perspective of the limits and capabilities of an agentic system, so we can visually map this agent has access to this data, specifically a CRM. It can execute the following tools, but it won't be able to do the following XYZ. Once we have that mental model as a security leader, even though we don't have deep understanding of the agentic system architecture, we can easily tell if an agent is deviating from the norm or maliciously compromised, because it's no longer accessing just the CRM database. It's accessing their internal DBs, and it's invoking other tools. It's having that base threat model, so we can have this solid mental model about the risks and capabilities about an agentic system.
And well said there, Ron. And I think that's the next step from the common sense. So there are common sense things that you don't need to do a full threat model. But then when you start adopting this technology, threat modeling, you're absolutely right. If you go to our website on the Agentic Security Initiative, there is a fantastic threat modeling guide that uses Maestro and extends the core tenets of threat modeling to model agentic threats. I think it also helps you get a deep understanding of what you're building, and helps you do defense in depth. So, I wouldn't just go and do going back to Ecolic, kind of in a similar scenario, I wouldn't just work on the access permissions as the one singular guardrail. I will look at content filtering. I will look at kind of how do I protect prompt injections. So walking through that system and understanding what it does and what specific risk you need to mitigate is the best thing that you can do to secure and build that almost kind of layered defense that we have another document. I'm going to talk a lot about our documents. We have the securing agentic apps that builds on that threat modeling and the taxonomy that we have, the threats and mitigation, say, hey, there are sandboxing, access permissions, content filtering. I don't want people to think, oh my goodness, this is Terminator 6 coming, and we don't have the tools in our kind of disposal. We do. We just need to. There are things that we need to research, but there are things we understand. We just need a method to apply. What's your take on that, Ron and Chris? Kind of where are we in kind of having the answers versus being systematic?
Let me start on this. Just a quick one. Just to follow up with your statement, John. I think our securing agentic applications document was actually it was well received on my recent conference in Stockholm, Sweden, when I was explaining it to the crowd. It's the way I explain it is when we started with threats and mitigations document, it's actually the how, I mean the why, and then this document, this securing agentic applications, is the actual how, right? More practical. And what I've my focus for in discussing that agentic applications paper was it provides architectural constraints, right? We have on that paper, we have what we call key concepts, right? This gives a developer, an architect, or a security engineer the capability to apply defense in that using based on the architecture, based on that key concept. One of the key concepts is the language model. So of course, there's basic security controls that you can apply around the language model. And one of the key concepts in that document is the orchestration, the orchestrator, right? You can apply security controls around the orchestrator as well. So it simplifies the threat modeling perspective because you can apply defense in that per component on the architecture. I think that's my take on it because that's why it's a good document. It's a good follow-up for the initial threats and mitigations document.
Chris, any thoughts on the available guidance and how people should feel about do we have answers to the problem? So
Yeah, no, I like the framing that Ron did there. And I'll say from my perspective, like I'm learning along with everyone else as we kind of move through this space, and having that notional threat model, like reference architecture, was good to get a mental model of, okay, like, all these systems are going to look different, whether it's a different model, multiple models, different agent kind of constructs, different internal architectures and systems, but just getting a mental model of, okay, like how do these pieces work? How do they fit together? How are they interacting? Where are the potential, attack vectors along this kind of broad architecture of where things can go wrong and what type of things can happen? I found it super helpful, and I imagine many others are as well. I know when I covered it in an article I've written, people said, thanks so much. This is really good to just kind of get your head around it, because it is a complex, space. So it helps you get your head around these architectures.
So just to summarize then, it is a fast evolving world. We need to have common sense and not jump into things, but pause a little bit and think why we're doing what we're doing. And maybe that's where the latest report that we published, the State of AI Security and Governance, can help actually, of how you manage those problems. But then we say, threat and mitigations, threat modeling gives you a more in-depth understanding of the systems you build. And top of that, there is a layered architecture-driven approach to secure. So that's a good recipe. That's a good pattern actually for people. So there is guidance out there. We just need to be proportional, and we just need to be risk-based. But then, we've produced so many documents, and now we're coming out with a top 10. What's the story there, Ron?
So I think that the top 10 is very timely, John, because um, since we released the agentic threats and mitigations document back in was it February this year, John?
Yep.
It's only this year, and majority of the threats and mitigations, the potential threats that we identified in that document, they are now actual security incidents and exploits. So in less than a year, majority of the threats that we identified are now real life security incidents, right? So this is why we came up with we are now planning to release the Agentic Top 10, which so to help developers, engineers, and architects focus more on the top risks that they need to identify and prevent as part of their secure design and development, right? And maybe you can add some more details on that, John.
Because, well, no, you're not kind of, you said it all there. The world is moving, and Chris said it earlier on, the world is moving fast. No one has, I counted all the pages of all the guides that we produced and everything. It's, 200 something, fantastic reading material. And normally I'll give you a tip. I use it, I go to ChatGPT and say, well, this is my problem. How can I use this document? But we need to give people a focal compass, and that's the top 10. And we have some pretty cool experts on our review board helping us do that, like Chris. Chris, do you want to add something about the top 10 and the direction we're taking?
Yeah, no, I'm honestly just humbled and excited to be part of this group. There's some amazing people in this group that are doing work like Ron at some of these leading organizations in the industry, bringing back real world experiences. And then to his point, at first when this got published, people were like, oh, they're way too far ahead. Like, things. And now it's like, oh, no, look at this incident and that incident. And like it ties to the things that are being discussed. And that's what's so cool is because, again, security tends to be a laggard. But this effort, this group represents to me being forward thinking, security being along for the ride of this agentic AI adoption and evolution, and putting out guidance proactively, and then as you see, it's not just theoretical, it's playing out now in reality. So this is an amazing example of the community really leaning in and kind of being along on that ride rather than the past where there's widespread adoption and then there's no real guidance and people are just lost and confused and they don't know where to start. Like, no, the guidance is out there and it's now being tied to real world incidents. Like this is a great opportunity of a community resource to lean into and get involved in.
And I think, 100% of that. And I think that's actually the enormous value of the community with something so new. The only antidote to hype and fear and all kind of things on social media is peer review. That's the essence of OWASP. And we're really lucky actually to have people like you, Chris, like Apostol, Vasilia from NIST, Hiram Anderson, so many, I will miss, to help us in this effort, but then have the hundreds of different experts contributing to that document. So if you want to know more about agentic security, go to the website OWASP GenAI Security Project and find out the security initiative and come and join us.